Okay. We apparently have everybody here, who's going to be here, so. See if I got other people. Oh, yeah, but it's already on. They did if they're on board. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I call the meeting to order. Is there any reflection tonight?
I do not have a reflection.
You're the one who's most reflective, so.
My reflections might be dark today.
Yeah. Okay, introductions. I don't think there's anybody who needs to be introduced, so. Moving on to adoption of the agenda. Anybody have any changes to the agenda? Which we can actually do because we're not a special meeting for a change.
I move adoption.
The only thing I had that's not already on here is I'll give an update. We can probably put it in the reports and announcements from the new group whose name I'm blanking on right now.
Well, the climate change committee.
I-
Climate change something or other.
Climate action planning. Something.
Climate policy.
There we go. That one, yeah. We met for the first time last week, so I'll give an update on that. You can put it in reports and announcements or in new business.
Sure, let's put a report in announcement.
Under old business, I want to just have an update on the discussion around replacing the 2 trees up on Horizon View that died.
I think that's new business item A. It probably should have been old business. I didn't think about it.
Okay.
But anyway, that's what I assume item A is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
New business.
yeah, got it. See, yeah, okay.
All right, any objections to minutes? Any more issues with the minutes?
I moved that approved as amended.
Second. All in favor? All right. Do I vote on these things?
Yes, absolutely, you remember.
All right. Public comments. You don't appear to have any public comments. Reports and announcements that you've been trying.
Yes. So the climate policy advisory team, I could have just opened my folder, it turns out. Met for the first time last week. There are 3 members of the climate group, 3 members of the planning commission, plus myself. I think that's all of us. And first meeting was mostly just an introduction to what the process is going to be. So don't have much to bring back and report at this point. One of the things that did come up in the room, just as we were talking about plans for communication stuff in the spring, is we'll be looking for community feedback. And an idea came up, the Arbor Day and Earth Day are within like a week of each other. And the climate team was looking at doing something for Earth Day. So we talked about, could we do a joint Earth Day, Arbor Day educational event of some kind come springtime. So told them that I would bring that back here as something that we can consider as we move into the new year and start thinking about that event. Yeah, there'll be more to report as we meet.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, you have I think your timeline is to June, fairly short time.
Yes, so we will be meeting through,
Your timeline? Or is that from something else?
part of it might be related to us. We will be, so our group, our deliverable is to give a draft to the planning commission by June. So we have regular meetings that'll be scheduled through June. And after that, we may be asked to reconvene if planning commission has questions or more things they want to bring back to us. But then they have June through December to finalize and bring it to council.
Is there any discussion as to the nature of that joint event at this point, or is it? all
Not
excited?
particularly, but talked about doing something around education, community education around both this process and the climate action plan. I am,
Something outdoorsy, you think, or are you thinking of just something like that? Yeah,
I don't have a vision at this point. One of the other things that I had been thinking about, I think I mentioned it to you at the event a few weeks ago. Was it could be interesting if there's any demand for it to lead a couple of the tree walks that you've been working on. And do those as come hear from someone who knows a lot about the trees, and we'll do a walk through the neighborhood, so. I know
I'd be happy to do something like that.
the book the book was by far the most popular part of the table that we ran at the
The old
event,
book too, we
so,
got pointed
yeah.
out, you know, there's newer versions.
Yeah. So, yeah, potentially something like that, potentially something in tandem with those other two groups and the kind of climate portion of things, so.
that sounds like a great idea.
Some ideas.
I hope it works out. We've almost certainly attract more people than our last tree planting event. Actually, our last tree planting event wasn't too bad. The ivy.
Yeah, I would.
But it attracted a fair number of people, but few people, not a fair number. Okay, thank you.
As far as announcement, we have a new board member who couldn't be here tonight, is that right?
Right.
Is there any announcement worth making about that? Elizabeth, I don't think the rest of us know him.
His name's Richard Saunders, and he couldn't make it today, so he'll be here in the next meeting instead.
Anyone else in the pipeline?
Not that I know of. I think there's a couple other ones that fell through, but he's official now. He's like,
Good.
he was passed through the city council, so he's an official member now.
We know what happened to Grace, I can't remember her name. Well, I think we should have them in the minutes.
She was mentioned in the minutes,
Yes.
There's a woman named Betsy
Bill.
Gorman last year,
Rachel Bill.
came to one of our meetings and expressed an interest, but. She was the one who was a little upset initially because she put in an application and then
Oh,
never
really?
heard back from the city. And then we sort of encouraged her to
Yeah.
renew that, never heard what happened.
Well, maybe the review process is immediate. I don't know, anyway, I don't know either. We had Grace Bell was here for the last meeting. But I haven't heard anything more from her. Do you know anything, Elizabeth?
No, but I can ask, our city clerk and see if there's an update.
Okay.
So there were two, Grace Bell and it was Betsy Ormond.
Betsy Orman was like 6 months ago.
Yeah,
Grace Bell was like last meeting.
yeah.
It was last meeting, like last year, just find out if there's any word of it.
Obviously, Richard, I'm gonna call him Brian, unfortunately, because I know his brother.
Did you know his father? He's a professor at UW. English and branch of biology, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know either. Richard had, I know he was sorry not to be here, he's got some business, he had to be in San Francisco for business.
His brother Brian has been real active, I know, with the stewardship council. I met with him once to talk about some of the data, previous data set on the survey trees. And talked about it.
Yeah, Brian leads the stream keepers.
I said, oh, okay,
Right,
that
too.
is through the stewardship foundation.
That's water with him right.
Part of the reason I'm interested in this is that my second term on the board runs out in February or whenever the terms expire. And I probably will not ask to be reappointed for another term, so. Will be-
I think it's kind of says you're not supposed to.
Yeah, I think
I'd be
2
glad
terms
if
is
you
what
were,
it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, but
And then you're supposed to take some time off, and if you come back later, you can. 2 terms, I think is-
I will be rotating off a year from then, so it'd be real nice if we could recruit somebody who has basic knowledge of understanding of tree biology. We've got wonderful people for public relationships, expertise in the city.
I understand what you're saying.
But Dick and I are the two botanists in the committee right now. There's gonna be zero.
I agree.
Every
It'd be nice. something like that.
Yeah, we hope to find somebody. We've always got Drew for the special expertise, but
But there are people around who are active in, professional arborists and so on, who we've had in the past on the
Mhm.
tree board, and
Mhm.
someone like that would be good.
yeah, that'd be great. No, it doesn't have to be an academic segment, Barbara's maybe better.
Well, you'll probably still be available for consultations as needed,
Sure.
I suppose.
Yeah, and like for Arbor Day this spring, if we plan something that I can help out with, I'll be glad to. I think it'd be awesome.
There was an arborist, I was gonna ask if they were interested, and I think the stewardship or parks, I think the Parks Board already picked them up.
I went to the stewardship annual meeting last week. And there was a new member of their board who was an arborist who.
Kathy.
Yes,
Mhm.
so, yeah, I thought that made me think of this.
Drew, how are you doing about getting on the Seattle board? You
Yeah, so I applied, I interviewed, just waiting to hear back. Seattle's a pretty slow moving city, with all the levels of everything going on, so. We'll see what happens, but. Yeah, it'd be interesting to be on both sides, be here as a city liaison, member, and then get to be on what would be a funny dynamic. But I will say too, just for recruiting for the tree board, anytime someone's emailing me and seems to have really like good knowledge about trees or good questions about just what's going on in the city, I always encourage them to come to an urban forest or a tree board meeting and just kind of tell them about it. So there are a few people where they've had really great questions kind of filtering through me that I've pushed to come to a meeting in the future and told them when they are and sent them the link and everything to just try to like encourage them to get involved. Like someone was asking me really specific questions about parking lot trees in the town center count, and I was like, wow, you would love the tree board if you're interested in parking lot tree coverage there. So trying to do what I can on my end to generate some interest as well.
I kind of jumped ahead of approving minutes.
Oh,
But maybe let's go ahead and see if, I don't know, we could see if Larry has, Councilmember Goldman has any. Sorry, I didn't report now before we go back to minutes.
I don't have a whole lot to report. Yeah, we did approve Richard Saunders. And right now the council's just we're immersed in the budget and the comprehensive plan. So other than that, I don't have any specific tree related updates.
Do you know anything? I've seen some things from Core that suggest that some changes have happened in the street widening plan, but is that accurate or just?
Not that I'm aware of. I think last month we talked about the letter we got from Sound Transit that basically it was polite but firm and said they're not making any more changes to the plan. I mean, they haven't finalized the Shetland crossing yet, but in terms of like queue jumps, that they're basically saying that they're locked into their current plan.
Whatever I saw from Core, it said that changes have occurred, but it didn't say what. And I suspect if you don't know about it, they probably aren't big changes because as you said, they were pretty clear last month that the very good ideas that I thought Jeff Snedden presented weren't going to fly. Okay.
And I can just say from the city planning department perspective is we still have not received any formal applications yet from Sound Transit for their project.
Yeah, maybe that was the impression I had. I guess it said it was delayed. That's the thing I saw before, said it was delayed. Basically means nothing, everything is always delayed, so. And I thought it might have been delayed for some particular reason other than just bureaucratic slowness, but probably not. Okay, now we'll go back to approvals minutes. Anybody have any objections to the minutes or comments on them?
I have none, but I think we do with the press meeting. Thoughts on that, or was it a previous?
No, it's minutes from a previous meeting that don't make a lot of sense in some places. I have to talk to Elizabeth about it.
Well, I've read them. I don't think they should be approved, so I'll move that we approve them.
I'll second.
All in favor? Unanimously approved. At least I assume Stacy raised her hand.
I saw her right there.
All right, old business, we had the tree diameters issue. Drew and I have not had a chance to work on this, so we have no real news to add on that, but Mark said he has some questions about it.
Well, I did have some thoughts. I don't know, maybe it's a short discussion if there's stuff pending that you will be working on that received it, but I guess I wasn't sure. I'm looking at the same piece of paper, the same table that I think you put together, Doug,
Right.
or somebody.
Which we basically, I think, approved last time, yeah.
And I realize I don't really understand the third column, which is labeled percentage affected internal. So for example, big leaf maple, it suggests, the proposal is from 42 inches to 30, and it says 3.2%. Is that of all big leaf maples in the city?
Exactly. Based on the survey, remember the survey is only, I know it has like 40 big leaf maples that sort of, we're trying to sort of guess the distribution, but that,
Right.
based on the survey, that would project about 3.4%. And with it, it's described as private because it's not really part of the proposed regulation for a number of reasons.
I see internally. Okay.
So we thought it would be useful for people who are looking at it, with tree board and maybe the council, I'm not sure if to have that information, what percentage of the different species are we protecting? So, for example, if I remember right, we're protecting, even with a 40 inch limit, we're still protecting 4.3% of Doug fir, which is really not bad. That's just sort of personal opinion.
So for example, that example, then the Douglas fir, it's 4.3%. That's not in addition to that. That means that percentage of the Douglas firs in the city would be now protected under these.
Right, exactly. It had nothing to do with the previous. No, it's not additional protection, it's just protection.
You think it would be worth putting the number of trees in that column as well? I assume that information is not too hard to derive from
Same information. I don't know. It's really just information for the tree board and the council. All these numbers, since it's based on one, I think in the case of Douglas big leaf maple, there are 2 trees in the sample over 30 inches.
The difficulty, of course, is the error around that estimate is so great that
Exactly.
it's hard to be precise and have that be meaningful. So
3.5% like the times, so that's the number. I'm not sure what it would be a few thousand.
You think that many?
I'd have to think about it, I have data here.
Yeah.
I would say the individual tree levels, there's so much room for error that it doesn't feel worth it to have numbers, but I think where it would be helpful to have a number, and I don't have it in front of me, so this might be on there. Is, as I recall, there's also a total
Yes.
currently protected and a total percentage proposed.
Mhm.
And that I think would be interesting and seems like something we could get closer to having a real number attached to.
That would be very good. Instead of saying 0.1, I think 0.75% is a good thing to have too. But we can multiply that by 290,000 and.
Yeah.
See what it is, I mean. Well, 1% of 290,000, so 3/4 of that. Somewhere in the order of 2,000 plus or minus, and the new formulation would give, not protect, because they're all protected, but give the highest level of protection to. About 6,000 trees, a little less, 5,500, so forth. Yeah, that's a good idea. When we move this on. You can put that in. And we can put that in the memo that we, if you justify it, if that's a. And I think I agree with you completely, that's. I mean, it may be 5,500 plus or minus 500, but it's a lot closer, still a lot closer to 5,500 than the other numbers.
Helpful sense of scale
Yes,
when we're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about the whole thing comprehensively.
Okay, good idea.
We could even take the iTree information we derived before or use iTree to attach
Given a monetary value.
value, stormwater retention or carbon.
that's a nice poster. Is that what you put together?
Yeah,
That looks good.
with your help and other people's help. So I was gonna mention that when we get to a little report on that session. I guess it struck me a couple of places there seemed to be pretty large jumps. But it usually struck me as large jumps or changes in the size. The big leaf maple going from 42 to 30. And the western red cedar going from 42 to 30. And I don't know, it struck me as different where the other ones, the Doug fir, for example, is only a 2-inch difference that's being proposed. So I just wondered how important is that, or how that does occur to me. That seems to me as something that would catch people's eyes and attention and maybe be distracting unless we're really clear about why we want to propose that big a change in the diameters. So, I don't know. Was there any data driving that in terms of lumps of sizes of trees?
Yeah, based on the numbers in the survey. In the case of the leaf maple, it's quite awkward because there are no trees between 29 and 40 inches. So
In the sample,
in the survey, I think 49 big leaf maples. So there's sort of ordinary size range, and there's a couple of exceptionally large trees, but there's nothing in between. So we would get the same apparent result, except 30 or 36, or probably even 39.
well, I don't know if that's the case, it may be that we want to back off that number to 30 to.
Well, I think the other reason for moving big leaf maple a little lower than the conifers was just the growth rate of deciduous trees versus conifers is a little bit different. So kind of also evaluating like that within it, in addition to just the Doug firs being a lot more common based on the data we had. So, we have a lot more Doug firs, so keeping their size a little bit higher, making more sense versus a lot less western red cedar and big leaf maple. And then big leaf maple in particular just being a deciduous tree. That's, if you look at the exceptional tree or landmark codes around various other cities in the region, a lot of them follow the same model of keeping the conifers a bit higher because of the growth rate versus the deciduous. I think was part of it as well. And I think by next meeting, we'll have like definitely a more outlined memo of the reasonings for each tree. So that might be like a good time too, to kind of pick apart a little bit more of this specific data concerns, at that time. But definitely writing down what you're saying now to include in the justification stuff that we're writing. And good to hear.
The other thing that I did is that I looked at the average size of the trees, and I think roughly what most of these are set about twice the average size of the tree, which in most cases where there's enough data is 3 to 5%. It doesn't mean that the tree diameters are a normal curve, but for the trees where we have enough data, twice the average is usually 2 or 3%, which is a nice number. And with this really weird distribution of big leaf maple, I think that's still the case. If you look at the average size of the big leaf maples, twice that is about 30. So it would be nice to be able to fit a bell curve through the tree diameter, but they just don't. They're not right. That's not right. They don't fit a bell curve. Anyway, but I think Drew's point about it being the only deciduous tree we're protecting is pretty important too. It is quite different ecologically than the others.
Well, we do have some other categories in there too that we've been considering adding. All oaks, for example, and then a category of other, everything else, which I'm still working to kind of get my mind around how advisable that might be for us to do or not. I certainly great if we could do that. It would be workable.
Well, the point on that is that as it stands, we have, for example, not this survey, but the previous, but found a 57-inch tulip tree. We just, could be just an ordinary tree with the current thing. I think a 57-inch tree deserves special protection. I think in this one, there's a 49-inch deodar cedar. And again, that's a big tree. It is an exceptional tree. And it ought to get it. Now we set the limit for that pretty high, I think 40, yeah. So that's higher than any other thing, but I simply didn't like the fact, we simply didn't like the fact that, a tree, only certain tree species are considered eligible to be exceptional. I think if they get to be that big, they're exceptional no matter what species they are, even if they're introduced. I still think that there should be a size number beyond which it's exceptional, no matter what the species is. And that's why we have that number there.
Yeah, I know like since I've been here, we have permitted 2 deodar cedars for removal over 40 inches. And both of them were in lower canopy areas as well and providing exceptional benefits to those areas. And there was a significant amount of like feedback about that permitting that we got from residents supporting that that those would be protected trees. But it's kind of the big tree argument. Again, like I think pulling iTree data would be really helpful to just show how when trees get to that size, just how the amount of benefits that they're providing really is amplified a lot. And how we also are really prioritizing diversity in urban areas as well as our natives, just to reduce our pest and disease issues and everything like that. So I really think like we can totally change that size if we want, but I think having some sort of size to protect other trees at a really large size, excluding like invasive species or things that are problematic is a good idea in the code. So we can crank it up a little higher than 40 if we think that would be better. But yeah, we've had a significant amount of trees over 40 inches that are non-natives, be permitted since I got here in March.
Well, that all sounds good. Would you just, I would appreciate if you would just review again, Drew. I mean, there's a practicality issue behind all this that we just need to be aware of. What is our ordinance say is required if someone should want to remove an exceptional tree?
If they're removing an exceptional tree, they're pretty much held to the same standards as a tree that's in a critical area. So it has to chart out correctly on the track matrix, essentially saying it's a moderate or high risk tree, with certain results, and that risk can't be mitigated through activities such as cabling, bracing, or pruning, or cultural, changes to the soil. So that's kind of the thing, is like there's definitely still a path to removal if it's a high risk tree, or the other thing is if you're kind of pursuing a reasonable use exception. So you're saying I have to remove this tree in order to like make my lot buildable, or be able to do something reasonable with my lot. Like that's another option that you can pursue that way as well. Are the 2 main ones. I'd have to look at the code to see the exact reasonings, but those are the 2 that we mainly deal with.
And so in both cases, is a public hearing required?
Just for a reasonable use exception, not
Yeah.
for not for a high risk or moderate with severe consequences tree.
The ordinance, the city ordinance basically says you can't take them out, can't take out an exceptional tree, period.
Right.
But,
Right.
as Drew was pointing out, the exceptional, the reasonable use, trumps that. It's a constitutional thing. Again, but in any case, if the rule is something you can't do it, it's the same thing for trees in critical areas, you can't do them. Which is, again, why it's essentially the same situation. It can still be done. The idea is to make people work really hard to find alternatives. Not just suggest it would be a pretty good idea if you could find an alternative, but
Yeah,
you need to jump through a lot of hoops in order to cut this tree.
but it's often well, I don't know, in my limited experience, it's been the outcome of a hearing that's made those options real, so that people had to not only consider them, but had to follow them.
But if they have to go to a
And
hearing in order to.
I know, that's fine, I think the idea, I just went with it, I guess how it was structured in terms of our code for that. Is it a major tree permit?
Yes, major tree permit. So we've got like the 2-week noticing period that's set, and then if it constitutes 50% of their total, there's some other like little things that would potentially require advance noticing. But generally, and I'd say most of the exceptional tree permits I've gotten right now have been for ones that are really unhealthy and heavy decline, and or pose a significant risk to people or property that can't be mitigated for some reason. And sometimes we get people that want to remove a significant tree because they are just kind of scared of it. But as they work with like an arborist and we have those requirements, they kind of say, then they're like, oh, this is actually not that risky of a tree. And it does become kind of a public education component as well, which is really cool to see in that sense.
Okay, well, thank you. I look forward to our fuller discussion of this. Ready to do that. I don't think.
Yeah.
urgency about it right now, but if you could keep moving on it.
Totally. I wish I could have had something kind of ready for this meeting, but it's been a particularly busy time for the planning department and just haven't been able to get the materials as I want to get them to you guys. So thanks for your patience.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, anything else on exceptional tree diameters? I think we did basically approve this by vote at the last meeting, so we can revisit it.
Did we?
Yes, we did.
I know we proved the other material,
I don't believe you had a formal vote because it seems to me that the formal vote would need the cover letter to go with it.
oh,
Yeah, there's nothing in the minutes saying we voted.
okay. Did we review it? I think we approved the tree list. I couldn't, yeah, I know before that, or I think it was last meeting,
I think that may have been the meeting before potentially.
maybe so.
I was under the impression we had voted formally to approve those, so we could move on to the memo, but you know, it's not in the minutes. It's not in the minutes, there's a decent chance it didn't happen, because when we actually take a formal vote. They tend to get into the minutes. So, all right, well, we will have another discussion on this once we have the justifications that we're gonna present to anybody who asks, I guess. All right, fall winter tree planting.
One of the things that I had in mind here was the replacement of those two Chinese fringe trees that had died up on the southeast corner of the reservoir at Horizon View. So I called around to all the nurseries in the Seattle area. No one has these. One nursery said they had some last spring. A couple nurseries told me that, oh, they haven't seen those available in the trade recently. And even a couple of places like Monrovia, which is a big supplier for nurseries around here, listed as something that is no longer available. There are a couple of online sources, both back east that I found. One that sells 1 gallon size pots for something like $89. And the other that sells 5 to 6 foot trees for $390.
How tall would a 1 gallon tree be?
Probably no more than 3 feet or something, I would guess. Would you say, Drew, something like that for a 1 gallon pot?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right, 2 to 3 feet.
Yeah, so there'd be, growing trees bigger than that is how they get expensive.
Relatively.
The
A
alternative,
gallon of milk is only like this.
no, a gallon
Really,
pot is one of those 6-inch diameter by about 8 or
Yeah.
10-inch deep pots, a standard size.
no
pot.
standards, well, there's a lot of different sizes, but.
Yes, but you've seen a lot of things in that size.
I just got a bunch of 1 gallon Doug firs and western red cedars and they're probably 1.5 to 2 feet
Okay,
there.
that's not,
Not big.
we're planning at a place the trees have already died.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's an area that they get mowed. I mean, one of the
Yeah.
trees that was there, I think, was killed simply because it was run into my mower. Even though it was big enough that it
Yeah.
was in sight and shouldn't have been.
Wonder who mows that, Brian, since the SU or if it's.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But the alternative is that at least one of the nurseries that I talked to said that they do have the eastern fringe tree, which is an eastern North American species, Chianthus virginicus, which is similar. I have one in my garden. I think if they were both mature and in flower, the casual observer might not even be able to tell them apart. So one option would be to get 2 of them, which I think could be sourced locally, and plant them. So it would be a mixed planting, 1 of the Chinese species and 2 of the Eastern North American species, but I'm not sure that would be a problem necessarily.
I don't think so.
You know, the idea is to have trees that are sort of alike.
Yeah,
I mean, a different planting of red cedar sit next to it.
right.
So you think actually would be available in a 6 foot variety?
I'd have to call again to check,
Less
but
than $350.
I don't think they'd be that much at a nursery locally, but I think that we might be able to find them in that, 4 to 6 foot tall range, and they would probably be in the order of $100 plus or minus.
Let me see if my goal is that they've got a nice online. The availability thing,
Where are you looking?
the golf nursery. Up in Snohomish, I guess, it's up north of here as well.
Oh, McCullough's. That's the place where they said they did have them. I didn't ask them about size.
They didn't have Chinese brand,
They didn't have the Chinese, but they did have the North American species.
but it's kind of Anthus, you said.
Chionanthus, CHIONANTHUS.
It takes forever to get through the H's on this thing. All right.
What do you think, Drew, about putting in the North American species along with the Chinese species?
I like the idea of putting the North American species in. And the availability locally to me is a big plus.
The one I have, I grew from seeds that I plucked off a tree that I saw in a nursery that was producing fruits. And I just pulled a handful of fruits off it.
That's
Got two of
awesome.
them. And it was in the ground for something like 15 or 16 years before it flowered. And they're dioecious, so I didn't know whether I had a male or a female until it finally flowered.
Where'd you pull the seeds off of?
At Flower World, you know, the nursery at Flower World,
I
the huge nursery.
Yeah. So is the site, which is the site the major factor in driving your thought about those types of trees?
Well, you know, it was
Site limitations there.
the decision was made by Steve Hahn. I mean, he was the one who
Mhm.
did this, led this before I was on the tree board. They're at a corner, there's concern about sightlines and so on, so these are small standard trees, that is a single stem. You know, more of a
Mhm.
broad but not too high crown,
Probably wires there too.
maybe,
Maybe, I don't know.
yeah, there is a pole, there is a power pole right on that corner also, so there must be wires attached to it. So they probably grow to 20 to 30 feet high max. I guess 20 to 25, right, or like a maximum height. And they have choice flowers in the spring.
But there's clearly some of the iconic natives that would not be appropriate at that location.
It's also a location that experiences, you know, drying soils in the summer, so part of the decision may have been made based on that. I don't know exactly what Steve's decision was on that, but on the other corner where they planted the 3 parodias, you know, those have done fine now that they're established.
I helped plant those.
Oh, he did. Good.
Trying to remember what the soil was like, if it was a thick kind of.
I think it's pretty hard soil up there.
I
So
bet it is. Yeah.
around on that southeast corner, it's a little bit lower and it might be a little more moist in there. I don't.
Well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me, to go with that North American variety of that tree.
If we wanted to authorize going ahead on this tonight, Drew and I could work on, you know, figuring out how to get them and move ahead on this expeditiously, because they should be obtained and planted before too long.
Remind me, whose land is it? Is it
City, I presume, it's city right away, street right away.
Okay,
It's
so are
not-
you the only one who has to approve that?
Yeah, I'd say given the current city makeup and everything, and that trees were already there, that this is something that we can go ahead with. Usually, sometimes there's concerns about sightlines and future work, but again, if this was already an established acceptable planting location, and we're constantly looking to add more trees to appropriate city right-of-way areas, I don't think there's any issue through the city with that.
You know, I think we gotta, I think, Drew, that we better check, just to be sure that it's not SPU property. I don't recall at the time if there was authorization, whether it was SPU or the city. But it's along the fence, it's within, although the fence, I guess, is at the top of the hill.
No, the fence is sort of down lower on the hill.
Okay,
There is an informal pathway that people walk,
yeah,
and it's between that pathway and the street,
right.
not between that pathway and the fence. So if the fence is the SBU's property line, then it's clearly city property.
Yeah. Well, that might be too, but, well, I don't know. I guess if we feel the need to do that, I don't think anybody's gonna object or complain to. Nice job of replacing some trees there.
Yeah, especially because it's a replacement. Again, if we were exploring like a brand new planting location, I think there'd probably be a higher level of checks that we need to go through. And especially, yeah, if there's a clear fence there and we're talking about that SPU kind of designated pathway, like thorough through right away. Is that what you're
No.
referring to?
No, it's on the southeast corner of the reservoir. That
Okay.
Gravel walkway is on the west side of the reservoir.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's any issue that I can see. Again, there's just limited, like I know Mark would be fine with it. And there's limited just available staff in public works right now to run something like that through. So the only thing is like if it was on SPU property, there'd just be a chance that at some point in the future, they'd request to remove it if they needed to do any kind of like SPU related infrastructure stuff at that point is generally how that would work.
You can't take any time to look and see whether it's just you property or just go to.
I could. I'm pulling up the GIS right now, but without knowing the exact location, there's just kind of a limited amount of investigatory work I could do. You know what I mean?
Street rights of way extend from what, the center of the road to a certain distance or something like that, and.
Yeah, and it can change.
You know, the 6 or 8 feet of property that I garden along the street side in our house apparently is right away, and if the city decides they want to widen the street or something like that, we have no recourse.
I know SPU was working, I was working with a guy from SPU about the possibility of installing solar arrays along the side of the hill that make up on the reservoir. They were interested in that. He was concerned because well, they do periodically have to do maintenance there, and there are underground pipes that sometimes require maintenance. I don't think it would interfere with that particular location that we're talking about.
Did you say you're talking about the southwest corner? Sorry to interrupt. Or what? Southeast corner? Just take a little look here.
They were at the time talking about putting little generators inside of the pipes because apparently water circulates around that the reservoir at certain times. I don't know, according to some maintenance pattern or whatever it is, but they had the opportunity to install small generators and take advantage of that. Yeah, I'll try to get up. Okay.
Is this the area we're talking about?
Yes. And
you see, yeah, and that's it, that little detached piece where you're at there.
yeah, right in there.
Yeah, that looks to be city right away.
One of them may have been to the left further and to the west further and the other side of that walkway. I'd have to go up and see if I can identify where the plantings were. The furthest to the east one is the only one that's still there. So right where your arrow is right about now, or a little further.
Barely see it
right.
actually.
Yeah, you can sort of see a little bit of a shadow, I think, that it's casting.
Yeah, this is approximate as well, so, but I don't think it's an issue in this location. If you were looking to plant something in here, like that would potentially, pose a conflict. But this is pretty close right away.
Do you have the property lines on there? I can't quite see them. It looks like the faint red property lines or.
Yeah, this would be the, and again, this is an approximation, based on the aerial overlay. As you can see, it's already a little off here.
Yeah.
So I would guess if anything, it's shifted to the west a little bit more in this area. But this is the line.
They're usually surprisingly good, actually. I found them. In my own neighborhood where I know where the property lines, I think I know where the property lines are. They're not bad at all.
If
Yeah,
you go over
just-
to, if you go over to the southwest corner, I think you can see the 3 trees that are still there that show up.
Oh, okay.
See those 3 small trees? No, not those big ones, the small ones there, right?
Oh.
Those
Yeah,
are the
yeah.
parodias that were planted at the same time.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
the
then
rough-
it seems like the other three were probably here.
Yes, right, in that vicinity.
You think it's worth digging a hole and looking at the soil?
We could, what I would do routinely anyways is dig a much bigger hole than we need and do some soil amendment at the time we plant it and make sure that drainage is okay. I think, I actually think it's fairly good there.
I figure it's the same as the other three that have done well.
Yeah,
I would just also make sure that with the money we're allocating towards getting new trees, that we also just budget a small amount for well, making sure we have mulch to mulch them in, just to avoid mowers getting too close to them, and then some type of just fencing, again, for the same reason, to make sure they can get established properly without someone coming in and mowing that.
yeah, I
maybe
think
doesn't
stakes
understand.
and wire to hold them up, one on each side, because the other one that was killed, I think, got simply run over by a car or a vehicle that cut that corner and just ran it down. That one resprouted, and I hoped that it would survive from the resprout, but whoever mows up there afterwards just kept mowing it and never gave it a chance to regrow.
Well, so it sounds like we have the trees in mind and sounds like we'd be able to get them.
Yeah.
I wonder about, well, and so and assuming the location is good, it sounds like it is. I wonder how we go ahead and move on that then, if we want to, I guess if we want to try to do it before our next meeting. There certainly is a value in notifying the public about that and inviting the public to come, anybody who might be interested in helping with that. And that's kind of a tight timeline for that.
Yeah, I think that the later you get, the harder it's gonna be. The nastier it's gonna be.
Yeah,
And the less.
October, November is ideal time to be planting
So I think
trees. Certainly sooner the better.
somebody would like to move that we. Approve this project and whatever it costs, within limits, maximum $1,000, let's say, for cost.
Yeah, I don't think it'll come close to that. I mean, even if we buy some mulch and stakes and stuff,
500.
500 should probably be enough. I can't imagine the trees would be more than 150 apiece.
I wonder what the possibility of the city paying for it. I mean, I don't know if that's a given.
No, well, we do have a budget, right?
Yeah, we
That
have.
we are supposed to use for buying trees. And we haven't used much of it in recent years.
It's quite large.
Yeah, it grows a little bit every year, so. We should be spending
We
more.
should have that, yeah, we should have the money, and I'm quite sure.
So I don't think we should need to ask the city's permission. I think we have money that we can use.
Yeah, well,
Drew would probably be the best person to,
I don't believe that the tree fund is our money.
well, no, I agree.
We're certainly one of the legitimate uses of that money.
Huh.
But I think it's bigger than us, but it is large enough to certainly cover the expenses we're talking about, but maybe we want to just be sure that's on the up and up.
There's also a small reimbursement amount that we can get for Arbor Day through like the Tree Cities program and the Arbor Day Foundation. And I don't quote me on this. I believe though it was around $500, towards expenses. So I'm fine submitting also whatever we spend on this, as our tree planting for Arbor Day, since this is just a better time for us to be planting anyway. And it lines up with local state Arbor Day stuff a little bit better. So I think that, we can get that there. And then I've never been here for any disbursement of tree fund stuff, but I would imagine that one of you guys has, and it's just worked with like requesting it and then getting it. But I haven't been here through any tree fund disbursement. So I'm not positive about how those funds get dispersed.
We can find out how much those trees would cost, and then extra mulch and any other soil augmentation wanted to use for that, and figure that we can cover the labor ourselves or with volunteers.
I think when we planted that tree, Arbor Day tree up at the Horizon View, I donated the tree. I bought a bag of compost, a bag of mulch, and a couple of stakes and some of that flexible wire, rubber covered wire, which I still have more of, to stake it out. And so the whole cost was under $100. I just submitted receipts to whoever was the
Yeah.
arborist at the time and got a reimbursement. I don't know what fund covered it.
You did get reimbursed.
Yes,
Oh, good for you. I wasn't assuming that, but, are you able to do that, Richard, to just, so we can tell
Yep.
Drew what we're talking about in terms of 250 or 300 or whatever, and
yeah, unless the city has a way to pay for it directly at the nursery, for example, if you have a city credit card that we could use or something like that, I don't know.
I can ask Mark. That's something I can just follow up with him Monday on and get an answer to you guys. We definitely have a department card. I just don't know what expenses can all be related there. So just to check in with him, and then I can provide an update on Monday.
And since we do have the tree board, the tree fund, I mean.
Yeah.
It may be hard to use a credit card to take the money out of the tree fund, but they're already.
I'm sure if the tree credit card's used, it has to go to a budget somewhere in the
Yeah.
city.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
So,
So
yeah.
that probably is easy.
So.
Oh.
Yes, and make it happen.
Okay, small adjustment. Won't talk to him on Monday. Monday is a city holiday for Veterans Day, so it's gonna be Tuesday.
Okay.
Or Friday if I can get a hold of him, but it's just easier when him and I are both in office to have a quick discussion about it. But
And I'll call around again, see if we can find specimens.
yeah, if we could get a rough price estimate too, that would help when I'm talking to Mark to just be like, here's the amount, how would you like us to proceed?
If you get the green light from Mark to go ahead and purchase, when are you hoping to do this? Do you wanna just pick a date?
yeah, I was wondering, we should probably have, maybe think right now, what the target date, we got this thing called Thanksgiving coming up.
I would like to do it before then if possible. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
If we can get the trees next week, we could plant them the following week. That would be the week of the 17th to the 23rd or something.
You wanna do it on a weekend, so we can.
We could,
If we could do it on a Saturday, it would be nice, I think.
my 23rd is open,
Also, except for the evening, but.
so is the 22nd, the Friday, so. Those days would be good for me.
Or, so the 22nd or the 23rd would be our first choice, if we can do it by then, or the 22nd would work. Would December 7th be, I know we'd like to go before Thanksgiving perhaps, but that first week in December is not.
That's fine if the weather holds, the soil isn't frozen.
Is the soil frozen and mainly an issue for digging the hole? Or
Yes,
is it
right,
gonna
right.
affect-
Once you get down a few inches, that's not an issue, and anyway.
And it's pretty rare to scale.
Yeah.
The soil never gets frozen anywhere.
Yeah, more than an inch or two.
Right.
And the tree's gonna survive.
Yeah.
That's against, I guess, really cold.
Yeah.
So the related issue, and I'm not sure if we can blend this in here or not, I think probably not. Not entirely sure, remember Mandy Parker, member of the tree board who died while she was in office. Her husband wanted to put a bench somewhere in her memory. And we talked at the time that it would be nice to do it in conjunction with the tree plant. I don't think you can get a bench thing quickly though. But if we can figure out how to combine that in there, the picture didn't look like there's a very good place for a bench.
That's not a good place for a bench.
Yeah.
Maybe up near that tree we planted a couple years ago, though, in Horizon View. That Japanese snowbell,
I think he was hoping we'd have a sort of an event to,
to plant something and put the bench in or something.
Well, just, not just sort of hold the bench up there and dump it, but have
Yeah.
some kind of an event, so maybe
Yeah.
just scatter some of our ashes near the bench or something, or near the tree or something. I don't know, I'm not sure. I don't think that fits with this, maybe I should just, we had wanted to do it later.
The last time I spoke with her husband, I got the impression that he was planning to do something with his family around that, and I don't know if that's happened or not. And I thought it was maybe a tree that he was interested in. I think I'll put a bench better, you may be right, I don't know. So we're talking about getting a cost to do this, figuring out how we pay for it. Let me just know what the mechanism will be. And aiming for the 23rd, my first choice. Does it need to do that? So I guess if those things can fall into place like in the next week, then we could do a press release.
Oh, okay.
And I'd be willing to work on that, simple press release. Victoria will proofread,
Okay.
read my work.
Happy show.
Stacy here. So given those factors, are we ready to move that we go ahead and try to make this happen if we can?
Yep.
So I would make that motion then, that we proceed with that date in mind and with those factors to get prices and figure out how to pay for it. And then go ahead and do it.
You can make it a little more formal sounding motion.
You want a more formal sounding?
Yeah.
I would say let's put maybe a $600 limit on it tentatively, and if it goes over that, come back to either by electronically or something to.
We can't do that, but
We can't do that.
probably not, don't want to be together.
Well, we can keep each other informed as we get news. We're making a decision that we're making regarding this is to do this project. And without,
We probably, if we allocate, if we say we want to spend up to $600 in the tree fund or other source, we probably can't call each other and say, let's make it 7 months. I think that's probably really right. But if it's 600 to 600.
if it's gonna be more than that, I think we gotta revisit it at our December meeting.
Exactly.
February or March.
Okay.
So,
2 trees won't cost us that much.
no,
Let's bet it is cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a more or less formal sounding motion.
I thought his motion was perfectly fine.
I thought it was okay too.
Well-
With the addition of the.
We'll leave it up to Elizabeth to
the
put it in
price-
words that-
price we wanna put on it. So that was the motion. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I'll try calling around on Friday.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard and Drew, for picking that up. That'd be good to do.
I would have sworn the McCulloughs had an online, at least available in PDF. I can't find it. I've looked at my phone later.
You know, I have nurseries oftentimes are hard. Don't do that very.
Yeah, like, and I think in retrospect, I don't think they actually had prices on it. I think they just had. Oh, they might have. They might say $1 slide or something like that. But I can't find it. So they got what I thought they had. Okay, final, no, it's next to last, the middle order of new business, Community Climate Action Fair event recap. Yeah, Victoria and I were there for, it was a 2-hour event from 10 to 12. And it wasn't really a big public event, I thought. It was, there were probably 15 organizations represented there who had tables, environmentally related organizations. And mostly we got to know each other.
Yep.
Was it supposed to be a public thing and just people didn't show up, or wasn't advertised well enough? Or
There
what?
were a handful of community members who came through. I mean, it was up in the commons, so it was open. And there were a handful of folks, but the majority of folks that I ended up talking to were from the other tables wandering past.
A handful, it may have been 24 people. And there were kids, but you know, I don't know if you visited that area, that's that the climate hub and what's been put up there. On that wall that was targeted and approved to use for this purpose, they've begun putting up stuff, climate related information and displays. You know, I think it's an evolving idea. I think they're gonna have continue to solicit materials from organizations and from the public. And I think exactly what that mechanism is for getting materials up on the wall is still somewhat in flux, as I understand it, but I think it's a great idea. So we took the opportunity to give out to promote large trees, right? So we had this this poster that we put together. Some number of people worked on this. I don't know if you can see where the camera is, but it's got smaller trees, larger trees, and then it shows in terms of the CO2 capture for each one and the stormwater runoff that's avoided for each of them, the smaller and the larger.
That's a great visual.
Conversations that we did. And this is another great one. Stacy, talk about this one. I thought this was really cool.
This was a very quick put together via the friendly Google Sheets, not AI actually. AI failed miserably at trying to generate this chart for us. No. No, it was purely a pivot table out of Google Sheets. So, but once we put the data in there, I was able to create a quick bar graph.
Yeah.
That detailed some of the iTree stuff that you had sent over roughly on what back of the napkin sketching there, Mark? Or that
Yeah, well,
sheet.
I didn't quite understand. Did you ask a question of me?
Oh, sorry. No. I was just saying the data, the way you originally presented it to me was a quick sketch, hand sketch, I think. So, yeah. Anyway, we got it put together. I'm glad.
Anyway, and the visual really kind of stark, I think, and kind of cuts to the story pretty quickly. So,
But the data here are the same as over there. It's just
Yeah.
put in this graphic form.
yeah. I didn't use a ruler to measure those lines and be sure they're all accurate, but I'm sure Stacy did. She put it together, so anyway, just a couple visuals that came out of it. I think that may be helpful to us in the future for other events or if Drew, if you have a need for that, I could share the file with you for the data on the flag.
Yeah, send them over.
It's sort of something to have for the Green Fair next year.
Yeah,
That is just like people do come.
Yeah.
it's something we could use, and maybe if we get to the point of presenting proposals to the council, it would be an aid that we could help make that case.
Or like the LFP newsletter too, just write a little write up and like a nice visual might be
Yeah.
cool too.
That's true. Yeah. Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah, before whatever council meeting you get, consider that and the proceeding LFP news.
Anyway, I don't know what else to say about that. It was a pleasant way to spend 2 hours. There was a bass player and a keyboardist there providing nice background music, so that was fun.
Well, I think it's great that we are participants in anything like this,
Yeah,
regardless of how many people show up. I mean, it's just, we should be there.
yeah. And the other people at tables were obviously environmentally related and some more climate related than others. There was somebody there who's interested in starting, as I guess it started a block climate watch organization of some sort with people interested in climate around the neighborhoods of Lake Forest Park. Provides a resource to people in their neighborhoods and that kind of thing. So that was one that I remember talking with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think they were at their table when I floated around, so I don't think I chatted with them, but yeah, it was nice to see just how many folks are working on related things. Had some good questions from folks about the data that we had up and yeah.
So, I mean, the idea, as I mentioned already, the idea of this event was inaugurating this climate hub on that wall to the right of the stage as you're facing the stage in the commons area. And it started as a project that Dana Campbell took on in a training program that she participated in called CATS, Community Action Training School. And so it was kind of a capstone project. Each of the students there has to do something. That's what she came up with. So it was actually following through and starting that idea that she had there. Dana was a member, is a member of the Climate Action Committee as well.
And it sounds like a good portion of the vision for it is space for information sharing, community billboard type things, bulletin board. So will be a good option for doing things like advertising whatever we do for Arbor Day, as well as if there are other things like this that we want to be able to put out, just like some general educational information might be a good place to be able to do some of that.
Anyway, that's all I think we have to report on that. Yeah, sounds like a good to do and
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a good thing to have as a sort of permanent living, and information that Lake Forest Park is living up to the climate. You know, we've got this thing in our common meeting place. Talking about it, yeah, it's a great idea.
One of my takeaways was that I'm jealous of the custom tablecloths that other groups have. So I might look into how much it would be to get something printed for us. So
A tablecloth printed.
a tablecloth that says like
Something
Lake
hangs
Forest
across
Park.
the front.
Oh, Fred.
We had the Tree City USA one up, but I had a number of people come over and be like, Tree City USA. And I'm like, yeah, we're the tree board. That's just like a thing. So, yeah, if we're gonna do more tabling events, it might be nice to have.
I contribute to making that happen.
So I'll look into it. I'll do some research. Trying to jazz up the table. We got lots of compliments on the little trees.
They're cool little trees. The same ones we had as the previous event.
I did a new version of them, but yes.
New and improved with stands,
Yeah.
built-in stands.
It was really effective where we were.
Yes, catch people's attention.
Grant update, I'm not sure what that is, so.
Oh, that's me. So I added that one. I mentioned to you guys a while back that I was going to start kind of looking for grants that might be applicable to the work that we do and what we're doing, just to kind of fund some initiatives and, you know, projects. And so I did find one that I applied for. I'm waiting to hear back from but I just kind of wanted to share with you. And a little backstory on this grant and where I heard about it is I went to the Urban Forestry Symposium that was held on the UW campus. And it was just closely worked with some of the indigenous tribal leaders in the area. It was a really great event. And kind of had some people from City of Seattle and the tribes and talking about partnerships that were going on and tree equity. It was, I thought, a really great day of learning and connecting with other people. And sustainable, and if I ever hear of stuff like that again, I'll try to send it to the tree board just to see if it's something, you know, you guys are interested in going to at all. But the director of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative was there. Giving a little presentation on SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and told me about a urban forest improvement grant that they have right now. And so this is just a little information on it. And basically SFI has an urban and community forestry sustainability standard. And they're offering grants right now to pay for municipalities to do an assessment survey against that standard to kind of see where you line up. And there is, I think this is the one I wanted to do. Yeah, these are their multitude of objectives. So different areas like human health and well-being, protection of biodiversity, stewardship of natural resources, planning, you know, all this stuff, urban wood. And so basically you kind of, with this grant, hire a consultant, or it provides extra staff time in-house, whatever you want to do, to go through all of these and kind of assess where your urban forestry is compared to the standard. So it can kind of show us areas where we may need improvement, you know, or things to work on, and just kind of help guide what we want to maybe work on as a group, as far as urban forestry stuff. And so I can link that if anyone's interested in looking anymore. But again, that's the urban forestry standard through SFI, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative.
Who is SFI? I mean, they're part of the Forest Service, or?
They partner with American Forests and a bunch of other groups. I had it somewhere on here. So I know they partner with like ISA, International Society of Arboriculture, my group, and UFCS, the Urban Forestry Society. That's for municipal arborists, that's around. So they're kind of partnered with a bunch of groups. I think they're gaining a little bit more traction. Oh, UCFS, yeah, the Urban Community Forestry Society, the Arbor Day Foundation, Tree Canada, American Forests, and ISA are their partners. So they're a newer group.
Yeah, nonprofit, not a governmental agency or something.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they're separate. So it's just an independent, just kind of like assessment, and you meet with them quarterly if you get the grant. So just kind of looking at, you know, how your stuff's going, where maybe you could like look at improving. So it's not like a dedication to doing anything in particular, just kind of you know, a chance to like look at how our stuff is and see any suggestions they may have or feedback and those kind of things.
Well, a lot of that stuff you, oh, sorry, Stacy has her hand up.
I just wanted to ask, how much is the grant for, Drew?
My application was to get $25,000 for it. And I think ideally, it would have to go through, you know, the city and C is, I'm part-time right now at 30 hours a week. So it would be great if that money could fund, you know, me to do it with extra time and would include like the fringe benefit costs of additional anything, you know, stuff like that. But we also could hire a consultant to do the work as well.
So, a good deal of what you were talking about is something we just did with the ice year report. Okay, so go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think the iTree report was just a little limited in the scope. It provided some good like inventory data, you know, for us, but wasn't as much about urban forestry like planning and like a vision for, you know, what areas we can improve on, and you know, if we wanted to do a new urban forestry plan. And that kind of leads into the other thing I wanted to loop in with this is that so I'm working on our Arbor Day application right now. Many of you are familiar with that, you know, and everything. And so I also got notice from DNR and had some reach out from a council member, I can't remember which one, about the Evergreens community program through the DNR. And this is a new year that they're doing this Evergreens program. Like it's never been done before.
That's Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah. And so with this Evergreen community, this is through a House bill and RCW provided Wisconsin DNR to do this community recognition program. So I applied for us through this program as well. If you see here, we are currently a tier 1 city. So we have a tree board, we have an ordinance, $2 per capita. So a lot of the same stuff as Tree City USA, observation and partial tree inventory. To be tier 2, the main thing here is that you have an urban forestry management plan or equivalent. So we don't really have an up-to-date, you know, current urban forestry management plan for the city. We've got like our 100-year legacy. We've got some like other guidance. But to my knowledge, you know, if there's anything else you guys think I should be looking at, let me know. We don't have just like a current large-scale urban forestry management plan looking at planning and public works and other departments, you know, and how they work together to like manage our urban forest. So to me, like this SFI grant is a good way to just kind of see where we're at, so that if in the future, if we want to internally or externally work on an urban forestry management plan, that we have a base document kind of guiding, you know, where we're going to take that management plan.
Well, one thing that struck me is that in many cities, the places managed is the tree strips, all those trees along the trees along the strips. We, I think, are somewhat, I won't say unusual, but all the stuff that we've talked about is all the trees on public and private property throughout the city, the vast majority of which are on private property. But I don't believe we have a map of all the public trees, all the trees on public property. If we do, I don't know about it. Do you?
We have a map of public properties. Again, along with the climate element work that's being done right now, we could potentially see some additional data coming out related to public parks from there. So we're going to have to kind of see how all that shakes out and what they get, you know, from that, because that could potentially be helpful. But, you know, we have a lot of right-of-way trees. We don't have a formal street tree program, but we do have a lot of like trees within our right-of-ways and our public parks. And other city-owned properties, but a management plan is also too thinking about how you want to manage your ordinances and things related to private as well.
So we do have I think it's called a community forest management plan. Have you seen that document?
What year is it from?
Well, it's old. It's at least 15 years old, and it was not as specific as I think it needs to be, and along the lines of what you're describing. So I've thought for a long time that one of our agenda items in the future should be to look at that forest management plan with the eye towards updating it and improving it. And if the work on that grant you're going to work on is you know, would lay a basis for that, it'd be helpful for that. I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and then we can collect a couple different sources like that older plan, you know, this, and then kind of look at using those documents to make informed decisions about what we want to do in our updated plan.
I know I've got a hard copy of that plan, and I don't know if I think I've seen it somewhere on the website, but I will look at that and find a way to get a copy of it to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah, just want to mention the grant and then the two program recognition things we applied for, Tree City USA and the Evergreen Communities. And then the one other thing I want to mention is I've been digging into our GIS data just to do some updates to like our critical areas review maps internally. And I did find a bunch of documents about a tree inventory from 2022 that looked kind of different than the tree inventory stuff that was done through the Facet, watershed document. And I was just wondering if any of you had any information about, because no one, is still here from that time in the planning department, about any kind of tree inventory efforts that may have been happening in 2022.
That was probably when we, as the tree board, still thought that we were gonna be responsible for doing that. And then the
Okay.
city planning office took that over and contracted it out. We actually went so far as to try to find, an intern to work on it and things like that. You remember that, Doug?
No, I remember very well.
You were central in looking.
Yeah, we had some, well, I think Gordon Smith was what we were
Oh,
doing it,
yeah.
but we had some wonderful candidates, everything like that, but it turns out that, we started advertising in June or July, January. We got some candidates in March and I think we had letters from them. But it turns out that if you're getting somebody to the city, you can't create a job and have them start working at the beginning of June. If you're talking about doing it in May. There was just way too much bureaucracy to make this possible, so we just backed off and said, well, let the city hire somebody to do the eye tree thing.
Okay, that must have been, I think, what I was probably looking at then. That's helpful, thanks. I was just like trying to sift through all this old data, and figure out what the lore was on it.
There was also things about the budget and who would control that and so on. It was out of our hands. It was clear that it was going to end up being out of our hands.
We were basically going at it like you were trying to hire a grad student to work in your lab or an undergraduate to work in your lab, and I think we had some good undergraduates, but all of us, I think, vastly underestimated the bureaucracy that's involved in city hiring somebody to do work, particularly work out in the field and get hit by a tree or something like that. That falling. So anyway, that's probably what you're looking at. The years as well, right?
Okay.
Now there's also the LiDAR study, but that's a few years earlier, and you must know that. That's where we've got all the maps.
What I would love more information on the LiDAR, like what they took. Because the other thing I'm trying to update right now is our steep slopes over 40%. To add that as a layer on our critical areas map, and if we had LiDAR data for that, that would make it a lot easier than trying to convert topos.
Yeah, I think it was I think the watershed company that did it. But basically, they just took the LiDAR of the whole city and saw where the trees were, went lot by lot and said this lot has 73% coverage, this lot has 12% coverage. That map is on the website. And there's a whole series of maps that tree coverage in critical areas, tree coverage by zoning and things like that. I will try to find them and so I'll get them to you. I'll get to use AirDrop to do it, not AirDrop.
Oh. Okay, cool. Yeah, anything you can provide is great. I know some of it's on the shared city drive somewhere. It's just kind of finding, where it's located. That's been an adventure.
It was a somewhat strange thing. First of all, there's two sets of maps. You got to be careful looking at the right one. It's 2009 maps, it's 2016 maps, and they're done by different companies. But I think the 2016 study was mostly done, and then the company got bought. And I have never seen a final report, what I would consider a final report of it. I've seen a lot of bits and pieces, I got a PowerPoint that showed sort of somebody might have presented. But it was a PowerPoint they might have presented, sort of saying, this is what we're in the process of doing. But I've never actually seen a final report, but there's lots of final maps. So the reports you'd like had tying all the maps together, I have never seen. So anyway, I will get you what I have. And,
Okay, cool. The one other item for grants that I just remembered I want to mention is another person I met at the Urban Forestry Symposium. Was a couple people who worked for King County in the invasive weeds area. I can't remember the exact name of the department. A few of their representatives were at that green fair last year, but I expressed my interest in pursuing grants related to invasive species removal and potentially finding a way where we could offset the permit costs through a grant for invasive species removals like large hollies, which and other laurels or anything over a certain size, and then potentially paying the cost of replacement as well as a way to just help deal with invasive species in the city. They said they were really interested in finding a way to help us partner on that. So I'm got to reach out to them still, but I'm hoping that can potentially lead to something where we can get some funding to, help with getting larger diameter invasive species out.
I think if you trade the permit costs and the replacement costs, that'd be great incentive to do it. I mean, you're still gonna be replacing a big tree with a small tree, but nevertheless, replacing a holly at almost any size is a good idea.
Yeah, one of the projects I've had in mind that has been back burner for years now is there's a section of 5 acre woods that's infested with black locust. It would be, and they're pretty big, so it would require somebody going in professionally and removing them. And then replanting with natives. That would be a good thing to do. I think we could do it jointly, maybe with the Stewardship Foundation, the parks people, and having some funding through an invasive species removal would be great.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely mention that as well in my email of just potential projects. And if anyone thinks of anything else along the lines of what, Dick's proposing and I'm talking about, feel free to email me and I can include that when I reach out to them as well.
Yeah, how big are you talking about? Landmark size, exceptional size?
I think some of them are over 6, definitely many that are over 6 inches. Nothing gets to exceptional. I mean, they're
Landmark is 24.
yeah, no, none of that.
No,
None of that.
landmark, just trees.
Yes, but it's, how they grow in and form a thicket and they get, a bunch of them and.
No, I'm just saying, if you're talking about 24-inch trees getting them out, there's a lot more work. You're talking
No, it's probably a number of them in the 6 to 12 inch.
I mean, we need professionals to
The
do it.
kind that I could cut down with a chainsaw, but I don't think I want to do that on volunteer time in a public park.
Well, they don't their roots rot anyway.
Yeah, that's right. So there are other things we'd have to do, like painting the stumps with herbicide and so on. And we're gonna. So.
Sounds like a great idea. Okay, any other grants? Drew, thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, that's
looking
great.
into. Yes, great, wonderful.
I love free money.
I probably said this before, but I just looked at these some old minutes that Elizabeth was saying. Happens hasn't mentioned one of her predecessors on it. And you were a lot better than you.
Yeah, it's a fresh breath there to have somebody like you who's taking initiative on things like this.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, so thank you. Like just having a motivated tree board that's there, likes to do stuff has been really great. It made my job more enjoyable, so I like working with you guys a lot.
Thank you we really appreciate your interacting with us so much and doing so much of the work.
And if you want to go up and do a walk through the 5 acre woods to show you what I have in mind sometime, I'd be happy to do that. It wouldn't take but a few minutes probably.
Bring my chainsaw.
On an unrelated topic, I had a person from Evergreen come out, evaluate a tree, my lot, and some pruning on another tree. And he said, "You are very good to work with."
Aw.
Probably know who he is. I think it's Jess or something.
I'm trying to think who I know from there. Cade.
A young man. Anyway,
One note about, you said walkthroughs of property and the climate action fair was with one of the guys from the water district. I've talked to them at a couple of our events recently, and they have offered if we're interested in doing a walkthrough of their well field. They said that when you look at the map, it's one of the most forested parts of the city. And that we might find it interesting what trees are up there. And what that property looks like.
Where's that?
I'm curious about it. I don't know.
What,
It-
was that?
The water district,
Oh, yeah, I think I.
the city well field.
Alan is.
The
Uh,
lower end of it has a trail that comes in right down by where 40th Place and Ballinger come together.
Yep.
I've walked that whole property illicitly because of that.
So I'm just like personally curious about it and may
Yeah.
connect with them, but if there are other folks who would be interested in it from a.
Yeah.
Urban forest point of view and want to go see what they've got going on, they said it's a pretty cool property with a lot of dense vegetation.
Just a tiny little water district, it just serves part of Lake Forest
Yeah, I
Park.
think so.
Yeah, I talked to the same guy about it.
Yeah.
At the Green Fair.
Yeah.
There was such a thing, a water district in Lake Forest Park. No, I know.
This is probably a historical artifact of a previous time, I'm sure you're here. So Drew, I have a contract out to remove that dead Douglas fir that you came out and saw on our property with Champion Tree Care.
Nice with Dan, yeah. Yeah. Next week or next month, I'll give you guys another little snippet into some projects I'm working on. I'm not gonna, it's not on the business today, but it's related to dead tree tracking, so that'll be interesting.
Oh,
There's somebody in the chat line at the bottom of the thing, is that?
Oh, that was Stacy, and I didn't notice it, and then, but then she just asked on the audio.
Cleaning up loose ends. All right, anything else to discuss today?
I just have two things I'd like to mention really quickly. One is that the video that we made at the ivy removal is not dead yet. I'm finally able to make arrangements to get it to somebody who, it's because of the size, I guess it's just awkward to work with. So I have it in the hands now, of somebody who has it and I think is willing to edit it.
great.
So I'm hoping that there's some side, that there's 5 or 6 minutes of useful video that can be put together in that. So we're still following that.
That's
the-
exciting.
Yeah, we'll see.
I
The other
really
thing,
thought that was dead.
just an announcement, the Miyawaki Forest will be holding its 1-year anniversary celebration, a birthday party on December the 8th from 3 to 5. Anybody's interested. They will be unveiling the boulder that's been carved by a Native American artist. And doing some other hijinks.
I walked through there 2 weeks ago. I had gone, last time I visited it was in December last year, not long after it had been planted.
A lot of stuff has grown a bit.
Yeah, it's really sort of growing up. I mean, it looks a little unplanned and, some things do going wild and other things sort of getting crowded out, but I think that was what they had to expect.
That's what the idea is, yeah, it's interesting concept. Anyway, just those two things, thank you.
Anything else? We're through our agenda, except for the agenda for next meeting.
I have one thing for the agenda for next meeting. Elizabeth, we should review the 2024 work plan. And then probably in January, start working on the 2025 work plan. Which we haven't been doing a very good job of, coming back to that work plan as often as we should probably, but we've been making good progress on it.
I think we've had a very good year getting stuff done that needed to be done, whether it's the work plan or not.
I would take this another plaudit for Drew, but the rest of the staff too. Those 2 years when I was chair of the tree board was when there was so much turnover in the city. And it was impossible to get anything done because there was no one on the city staff that you could work with reliably, or even in some cases, no one in the position that we needed to work with. So it's really nice to have stable staffing now again, Elizabeth, Drew, and
I think the staff is still significantly short-staffed.
that may be, but at least we have people who are in the jobs now, know what they're doing.
But aren't we still missing a senior planner? Is that in that position? Yeah. And a public works director. And a public works director. It's the fact that things are getting done is really impressive.
The building officials.
But the people we have worked with directly.
Oh, the people we have working director are wonderful, but the fact that
They're working with other people, managing to get things done when these,
Yeah.
there's still big holes in the city government, if I understand it right.
Do we all have copies of the current work plan? Or would it be helpful? to
We
ask
should,
Elizabeth
but-
To send us,
Elizabeth, if you wanna send them out to
Yeah.
them, that'd be good.
yeah, sooner rather than before the meeting, so we have time to think about it, that'd be great.
We'll have the sectional tree diameters on it again. Maybe a report back on the tree that you will have planted by then,
Yeah,
Or, yeah, some next step on that. Yeah.
anything else we know of for that meeting?
I do plan on talking about dead tree tracking for, next meeting. If there's time, but it's not urgent, so if we've already got a full agenda, it can wait.
Another not urgent and likely short topic that we could put on somewhere is discussing if there's any targeted recruitment opportunities that we have. So thinking about what groups may be active already in the city that may have folks, especially folks with tree expertise. I'm curious if there are organizations, clubs, societies, other things that we could be connecting with to do some more targeted recruitment efforts, knowing that you'll be rolling off in the new year.
Yeah, are there any tree types on the Stewardship Foundation, do you know?
you know, I went to the stewardship meeting last week. It's the first time I've been to one of their meetings in 20 years. And it was well attended. Well, it was chaotic, so I didn't really get to meet very many people. But,
I'm also thinking things like gardening clubs, et cetera. Are there folks who may? There may be natural paths to folks that are more invested, so putting that on potentially a future agenda to just
Yeah.
bring ideas of. What you notice out
The
there?
Stewardship Foundation, John Brew has been to a lot of our meetings.
Yeah.
I assume if you wanted to be at the fee board, he would.
he's on the board of the stewardship
Yeah,
foundation, so I think he feels like he's got his volunteer.
Oh, I agree, but
Committed, yeah.
but he might have some ideas of other people.
Yeah,
So trees.
You may have a conflict with other.
Yeah, no, he's had plenty of chance to decide that he wanted to be on it, and given how involved he is with the tree board.
Yeah.
Good decision, probably.
Sounds good.
Okay, any
Uh,
other issues? Yes,
No, I was just gonna move, we adjourn.
you might get.
Move, we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
I'll be in touch, Drew.
Okay, sounds good. Nice to see you all.
Yep, have a good night.
Drew, before you go away, is it? You know, just I'm talking with you now, unofficially, meeting's over.
The recording is still on, so I'm not. sure it's
Okay,
over.
all right, it's not over. All right, again, I'll talk to you some other time.
Okay, yeah, feel free to give me a call. I'm not working Thursdays right now because I teach, but Fridays on my cell, I can be reached, otherwise during the office, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Sounds good, thank you.
All right, yeah, bye guys, have a good night.
If any of you guys are looking for trees to plant, I've got a few things in my nursery at home that I would be happy to